All right, guys. So, as you all know, Twitter has been sold to Elon Musk. Well, I have the reaction here from CNN. They're going to cover the story a little bit. You can see the title here. Twitter agrees to sell itself to Elon Musk. There are some hilarious parts of this. The hilarious parts come a little bit later in it, but wait and see. This is classic CNN. I have it on 1.25 times speed here because I want to go through the whole video and it's a little long. So bear with me on that front, but let's listen.
Buying Twitter for an estimated $44 billion. Let's get right to CNN chief media correspondent Brian Stelter and CNN reporter Matt Egan. Okay, let's start with you, Matt. This wasn't going to happen. This wasn't going to happen. It was on, it was off, it was off. Now what?
It's on. It's on. This means that the world's richest man is going to effectively control one of the most influential platforms in the internet. This was weeks after Elon Musk, launched this hostile bid to try to acquire Twitter. There was a lot of resistance. A lot of people were betting against it. Now the board has come out and they say that they've reached a deal. Elon's going to buy the company for $54.20 in cash. It values Twitter at about $44 billion. The deal is expected to close later this year. In a lot of ways, this is classic Elon Musk. I mean, everyone was skeptical that he could pull this off, that he's going to have the cash. Is he even being serious here? He is being serious, and now they have a deal.
He's been critical of Twitter for quite a long time now. How do we get to this point now that it's his?
Well, number one, he showed he had the financing a few days ago. Yeah. He started to woo large shareholders, large investors, and that's why over the weekend, Twitter's board had to sit down with him, strike a deal overnight that finally was announced a few minutes ago. So how do we get to this point? Well,
so far, this has been just dry retelling of how this came about, which is all fair. Like everything they're saying here to this point is relatively factual.
Here is someone who was able to prove he could actually do this, prove he could bring the company private, and now, barring any hiccups, it is his. He does say in a statement here, free speech is the bedrock of a functioning democracy, and Twitter is the digital town square where matters vital to the future of humanity are debated. So in his mind, this is very serious and has been all along.
So again, on that comment, when Musk says stuff like that, I think that's great. Like, I agree with him. That's what we need to do. Now, will he actually regulate Twitter like a public utility and expand First Amendment protections? I highly doubt it. Will he make some more pro-free speech policies? It's possible. We'll have to wait and see. But when he says stuff like that, I agree with him. Now, CNN is so silly that they'll object to a comment like that, as you're about to see in a little bit.
He says he wants to make Twitter better than ever by, quote, enhancing the product with new features, making the algorithms open source to increase trust, defeating the spam bots, he says, and authenticating all humans. So he is approaching this in the same way he approaches Tesla and SpaceX. He's on a mission. He wants to save the digital planet, and in his mind, Twitter is critical to that.
Except that we're all more affected by this than we are SpaceX and Tesla. This affects all of us in terms of misinformation. How will this change our lives? And when he says open it up to free speech, does that allow more misinformation on the platform?
Okay, just the framing of that question drives me nuts. Just the framing of that question. Like, what do you actually want, ideally, if you're so concerned about misinformation on Twitter? Do you want to have a ministry of truth go around and ban every comment that's not factually correct? Is that what you want? I got news for you guys. I mean, I'm going to make up a number here, but it's just off, my own interpretation and perception of what goes on in the public discourse. But like 68% of the things I see are just mental, are just like not true, based on false premises, wrong in like 13 different ways in just a couple of tweets. Now, even given that fact, is it my instinct to say, you should ban that? You should pull that down. I don't like that at all. That doesn't agree with the things that I agree with, so now I really want to take action against it. I would never do that. Because, you have to let people speak. This idea of, we need a policy to crack down on misinformation. Who determines what is and isn't misinformation? Is it CNN? Because I got news for you. CNN gets stuff wrong all the time. Look at how hard they went on Russiagate. They genuinely thought that Bob Mueller would be taking Donald Trump out of the White House in handcuffs. It was hair on fire coverage 24/7. So how can they be the people who determine what is and isn't misinformation when they're the purveyors of misinformation in so many ways? And that's just one example. We've seen it time and time again. You're telling me there wasn't rampant misinformation when they had on Andrew Cuomo during the height of COVID and they were playing patty cakes with him and calling him the best governor in the country as he was making policy decisions that killed grandma? You're telling me they weren't purveying misinformation, or at the very least lying by omission, when they were talking about the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and it was all hair on fire coverage, and they were acting, the implication of everything they said was like, we should stay there longer, even though we've already been there for 20 years. And they downplayed the effect of the Afghanistan papers, for example, which showed how we had no clue what we were doing there, we were wasting all this money, there was war profiteering going on everywhere. This idea of like, we gotta crack down on misinformation. Well, in a world that made sense, if you had that policy in place, a lot of CNN stuff would be banned, would be pulled down. And then you have things, what happens when they misfire? They all said that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian misinformation or disinformation, and it turns out that was wrong, and it's now been verified even by the New York Times. So if these guys are in control, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? They're not going to make the right decisions. Of course they're not going to make the right decisions. What about the war in Iraq? It would have been called misinformation to say Saddam Hussein doesn't have weapons of mass destruction in the lead up to the Iraq war. If you were a brave person who went out there and said the correct thing, Saddam Hussein does not have weapons of mass destruction, you would have been banned if we had these platforms back then and if we had the policies that she wants back then. The fact that she hasn't thought through this in the most basic way is infuriating to me. It's infuriating to me. What about misinformation? Jesus Christ.
I think we're going to have to see what he does and exactly what rules he decides to follow or not follow. There are obviously local and state and federal laws all around the world that apply to these platforms.
Yes. Now, this is a point that's obvious. It's so obvious it barely needs, repeating. If there's actually a violation of the law happening on Twitter, that's not going to be allowed under any system, even a free speech absolutist system. So this is a really dumb point that people try to make to counter the idea that free speech is good. Like, well, what about if there's a video of somebody murdering somebody? What about if there's child you-know-what on the platform? It's like, of course you can pull that. You could pull that down. You could pull down direct threats of violence. You could pull down incitement, doxing. You could pull down defamation, libel, slander. Now, there should be an open process to determine those things, right? But of course you could, things that are actually illegal, yes, you can pull it down. Nobody's saying you should allow that up. Nobody. We have a First Amendment in this country. We lean heavily on the side of free speech, but that doesn't mean that there's literally anything goes at any point in time. No, that's not true. Everybody knows that's not true. So this is like a Weasley little nitpicky thing to say. Like, oh, you gotta follow the rules. Now, you do butt into a problem when the so-called rules are too censorious and they actually do discriminate based on viewpoint. Then that's a problem. But look, that's the thing that they want. They want their little, hall monitors, these idiots. And like anything that offends their own sensibilities, they want to ban.
He's going to have to follow at least some of those rules, I would expect. So I think it remains to be seen.
Yeah. It doesn't. He hasn't really released any details, any specifics yet, and he hasn't really had to about what this vision of making Twitter more about free speech. How is he going to pull that off? We don't know.
Yeah. He said in his offer letter that Twitter needs to be transformed as a private company. There are a lot of people on the right, Brian, who believe that as he talks about free speech, and he says he hopes even his worst critics remain on Twitter because that is what free speech means. What does this mean for the former president who's been kicked off of the platform?
And that spirit, which is on screen right now, that is actually that's the right spirit, right? He wants even his fiercest critics to be...
True. Now, his track record, again, we just went through this in the other segment you should watch. His track record on that, personally, is not great. He's tried to do retaliation and muzzle, Tesla employees who don't toe the line. So his personal record on that is abysmal. Now, that doesn't mean that he won't implement policies at Twitter that are more free speech, and I hope he does. But it should be pointed out that his personal record on that is abysmal. But Brian Stelter's right here to say, look, if he means this, then that's wonderful. Agreed, that's true.
Be in the debate and to be on Twitter and to be heard. Now, what that means for Donald Trump and for other politicians who get booted off this platform, that's going to be a big question on day one whenever he actually walks into the office and takes control of this platform. He can, in theory, rewrite all of those rules. When I refer to laws about hate speech and about pornography on platforms, there's not a law that forbids Twitter from having Donald Trump on. That was a company choice, a company policy chance. I suspect those policies are going to change. When reading through the lines of this...
Yeah, but keep it real. They definitely should. I mean, if you want to say in a very specific way, there are a couple of examples of Trump violating the terms of service and maybe even doing direct threats of violence. Remember when he was like beefing with North Korea on Twitter and he was like telling Kim Jong-un, like, to paraphrase it, like, I got bigger weapons than you and I'm going to attack you. Like, you can make a case that definitely was a direct threat of violence. And so that could violate Twitter's, terms of service and their rules under any sort of system, even a very pro-free speech system. I get it. But then you have the question of like, well, what's an appropriate punishment? Do you get a lifetime ban for that? You know, like, I think that's too harsh. And the other thing is, like, Donald Trump was the president, and he's probably going to run again, almost certainly going to run again. You can't just, like, ban him from the public square. And by the way, there's a good possibility if you allow Trump back on Twitter, that will hurt Donald Trump more. His poll numbers will go down. Because when you're reminded on a daily basis that the unhinged guy is really unhinged, well, people might dislike him more and more and more. So this notion of, like, you have to ban him so that he's unpopular or that nobody knows about him, it's like, that might not be the way it works. He, like George W. Bush was out of the public's eye for a very long time, and his approval rating went up massively because absence makes the heart grow fonder. So when Trump is gone, his approval rating probably goes up. But if you put him right in front of people and they're like, oh yeah, I forgot this guy's a moron, then that might actually hurt him. So there's even, like, good left-wing arguments and even partisan Democratic arguments for why you'd probably want Trump back on Twitter.
Press release, the board decided it had to take this offer. The board did not want to take this offer necessarily. They looked for other buyers, as every indication. They now have to hand over the keys to Elon Musk unless there's a snag. I do suspect we're going to see politicians who were booted off get back on. Whether that's actually a good thing for Donald Trump, completely different question. Yeah. Whether it's actually a
So now Stelter's making the point I just made.
Positive for him to be back on Twitter, completely different question.
Why? Why wouldn't it just be a positive? He would
to have him back in the news cycle around the world?
Meaning for him, why wouldn't it be positive for him? To be back, to have a huge megaphone, to maybe run for president with his huge megaphone, this would be a plus for Donald Trump.
You could also make the case that Donald Trump suddenly be back in the news, very visible in a way that he hasn't been, would remind people of exactly why he was, why he lost his election and why he was booted from office. So look, who knows? I think that's an example of a broader question for Twitter, which is if you get invited to something where there are no rules, where there is total freedom for everybody, do you actually want to go to that party? Or
That's the line right there, man. That's the line right there. If you get invited to a party with no rules and total freedom, do you really want to go? Now, look, I'm not a party guy, but everybody's going to answer yes to that. Everybody's going to answer that. And again, it's not even that there are no rules. You still can't you post videos of crimes happening. You still can't do direct threats of violence. But, like, yes, outside of the obvious thing, should we lean on free speech? Yes. And he's portraying that as like, this is crazy. You're just going to allow people to say things? Well, we shouldn't allow that. We need to censor more. Oh, Brian. Crystal made a good point about Brian Stelter. She's like, look, it's not nefarious. Like, this guy's not nefarious. He's just really not that bright. I think that's accurate. I mean, I don't think there's a hurtful, harmful bone in his body. He wants to be liked, but he's a lost puppy dog. Like, he doesn't know what he's saying. He doesn't know what he's doing. He hasn't thought through these issues in any serious way. Total freedom and no rules? Jeez, who likes that? Weird.
Or are you going to decide to stay home? And that's a question for Twitter users. Some Twitter users might love the idea.
By the way, her face is like, I would want to go to that party. It's just glorious. Look at her face. She's like, that sounds kind of awesome. By the way, the whole original idea of Twitter was free speech. Was like, this is a public platform where you come and speak your mind, and it's an open exchange of ideas. Like, that was the original idea of Twitter. This idea that you should censor, you should ban, you should deplatform, all those things, that's a new idea. And it is largely media-driven. The media tries to highlight, oh my God, all these terrible things happening because of Twitter, and the misinformation, and the disinformation, and this problem, and that problem. And then what happens is Twitter would overreact to the media criticism. Because they think it's like all sincere, and that they make good points. We saw the same thing happen on YouTube. Remember Adpocalypse? They had like a Nestle ad run on some like white nationalist channel or something like that. And then YouTube's reaction to that was to totally panic and defund all news and politics over the course of like a week. And then change their policies so that they push authoritative content. Like, the mildest criticism from these corporate media hacks and social media overreacts and goes full authoritarian and full censorious. And it's just, like, a lot of people get hurt as a result of it in a very serious way. I just want these people, just be better at your job. If there's misinformation, if there's disinformation that's flowing, counter the narrative and do it in a compelling way, do it in an interesting way, do it in a charismatic way, and then you will likely win the exchange. You know? Like, yes, sometimes the worst ideas win. Of course that happens. But the overwhelming majority of the time, they don't. If you allow free speech on Twitter, it's not like, geez, we leave it like this for 5 years and 78% of the country is going to become Nazis. It's just not going to happen. So they just miss the mark so hard.
Going to be absolutely no moderation and no rules at all. Others might not want to be anywhere near that. Am I crazy, Matt?
No, you're right.
Yes.
What
Yes,
happens to the advertising? I mean, if there's no moderation or little moderation, do the advertisers stay away? What does that do to the business prospects for Twitter itself?
Okay, you guys get the gist of it now. So this is indicative of a bunch of people who are anti-Elon Musk, who think Musk taking over Twitter is like the worst thing in the world. And this is actually just a little taste of it. There are plenty of people on Twitter who think it's like the apocalypse is here, Armageddon is here. And it's funny because, again, nobody really knows exactly what he's going to do. He has the thing he says he's going to do, but we have to wait and see what actually gets implemented. So nobody knows what he's going to do. So people who have like a strong opinion one way or the other are kind of silly, right? But there's also the flip side of it. There are a bunch of conservatives who are convinced like this guy is a superhero, that he's coming to save the day. And that's equally silly. So let me show you. There's this guy by the name of, I'm going to probably butcher the pronunciation here, Richard Hanania. And now this guy's a right-wing guy. And, you know, I've followed him for a while. He's an interesting right-wing guy because he's also anti-war. I don't agree with him much on other things, but when it comes to war, I think sometimes he makes good points. Now, this guy decided to troll. This is a complete troll job. This is, no doubt about it, it's so over the top, it's so comical. This is not what this guy thinks. I'm sure that he supports Musk taking over Twitter. He thinks he's going to implement, you know, free speech rules and stuff like that. So he says, Elon Musk takes over Twitter. He's a billionaire who doesn't even have a master's degree. Is that who we are going to trust with the future of our democracy? You see the character he's playing here, like the smug liberal elite? A few more years on a college campus where he could have been exposed to diverse ideas and professional educators who could have made a great difference in his outlook. In a time when so many are getting that experience, doesn't our democracy deserve better? And then he quote tweets Sean King here. Education matters. Please listen to an MA who has experience in activism and working for social justice. And note the contrast with Elon Musk's naive notions of free speech. And you can see Sean King here said, at its root, Elon Musk wanting to purchase Twitter is not about left versus right. It's about white power. Okay. Richard says, Many are impressed with Elon Musk's business accomplishments. Meanwhile, in academia, we've been creating brand new disciplines like queer studies and Chicanx studies that raise black and LGBT voices. Yet we worship spaceships because they represent whiteness in our culture. So again, he's clearly trolling. He's clearly playing a character. He's clearly playing the role of the smug, identitarian, liberal elite. And he makes it progressively more and more absurd as he keeps going to let people know, like, let them in on the joke. Okay. I saw a lot of people on the right who had no idea this was a troll. They don't know who this guy is. They think he's dead serious. And they were like highlighting this, and like Tim Pool thought this was real. He was, you know, tweeting about it and going after it. There's somebody else from another show, Adam and Sitch, I think, where one of them saw this and they thought it was real and they were going after it and they're like, look at this idiot. And then, look, well, here, let's take a look at the replies real quick. Let's see how far down we have to go. Jeez, man, Richard, you tweet a lot, dog. You know who else didn't have a college degree? A guy named Thomas Edison. So here's a guy who doesn't understand that he's trolling. How many jobs have you created with your degree? How many families make money out of your business? None, right? Okay. This is a right-winger who doesn't understand that that's a joke. Of course, we got a nice little Israeli flag in here to boot. You're a douche, this person says. Again, person thinks he's being serious. Zuby thinks this guy's being serious. He says, yes. I mean, this is incredible. Your tweet is definitely in contention for the dumbest of the decade. Congrats. Again, these are right-wingers who are so caught up in the culture war that they've become the thing that they pretend to hate. Like, these people say we hate social justice warriors because they can't take a joke, they take themselves too seriously, and they're just looking for things to get offended at. That's exactly what they're doing here. Can't take a joke, take things too seriously, looking for things to get offended at. These were obvious troll job tweets. And they're just looking for, you know, the archetype of the overly woke, smug liberal elite. and they thought, we got one. And then this is all they were talking about. And so the reason I'm pointing this out for you guys is to show you. I mean, everybody's lost their damn mind in the political conversation, especially on Twitter. Everybody's just lost their damn mind. Some people think Elon Musk taking over Twitter is the worst thing that's ever happened in human history. It's apocalypse. And some people are just brazenly coming out against the notion of free speech because he's saying he's in favor of free speech. And then you have the right-wingers who are so mired in this culture war and so against the social justice warriors and the liberals that they can't even spot an obvious troll job when it's the most obvious thing in the goddamn world. It's just astonishing, man. It's just astonishing. For the love of God, the culture war rots brains. And I've never in my life, that watching this whole thing unfold, I've never in my life, it never has been so clear to me that, like, man, I don't identify with any of these people. Like, I can't consider myself a part of anybody's camp or anybody's team because you've all lost your damn minds. You all can't even see straight. Again, it's either the worst thing in the world or the best thing in the world that Elon Musk took over Twitter. It's like, can we just have a rational conversation about it? And can we just wait and see what he actually does? I don't care what he says. I care to some extent, but I don't care nearly as much as what he does. So let's all just wait and see. Let's all just wait and see. But no, you can't do that. You have to engage in the culture war. You have to look for things to get outraged by and triggered by and then pile on. Again, the number of right-wingers who thought that this was a real person saying a real thing, it's out of this world. They can't even distinguish between actual woke people and power. And I do not buy the argument for a second. People say, like, yeah, but the woke people are so crazy that's why they couldn't just differentiate and tell that this was a troll job. No, it was pretty obvious. It was pretty obvious. Look, I'm somebody who's called an anti-woke lefty. I think that's a fair moniker for me, right? I could tell it was a troll job. If you couldn't tell this was a troll job, you're culture warring way too hard. Way too hard. Anyway, there you have it. CNN melts down against Musk. You got a bunch of right-wingers that melt down in favor of Musk. Nobody actually knows what he's going to do yet, but why would that stop everybody from slitting each other's throats and doing more culture war? If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.